I'm Jonny Say. I'm a BACP accredited therapist. I want to talk about OCD and the way it presents, the complexity and ideas for OCD recovery. OCD is an anxiety disorder where people are experiencing distressing, intrusive thoughts, which get called obsessions, and they're performing physical or mental actions, which get called compulsions, in attempt to alleviate the distress. This cycle initially provides relief, which diminishes over time until someone is spending many hours a day in great distress and it's causing a lot of functional impact to their life. The intrusive thoughts can take the form of verbal thoughts, so our inner monologue. They can be mental images. They also show up as body sensations, emotions and impulses where our body feels like it's about to move and the motor circuits of the brain and body are firing up. And it can come in different combinations of these internal experiences and get very complex depending on the individual. The compulsions can be observable behavior, so physical actions people are doing in the world, like checking things, decontaminating, trying to create order around them. They might be looking for and removing risks, reassurance seeking from other people, avoidance of the triggers and the things that cause distress. They might be researching online. They can also take a ritualistic form where people have to repeat actions a number of times. They might have to combine them with safe thoughts and numbers and words whilst they're performing these actions. The compulsions can also be purely mental compulsions or rumination. The person may analyze the thought or feeling. They might worry about the future and catastrophize. They might create safety plans. They might be mentally reviewing the past and memories. They may self-reassure, telling themselves that these things aren't true or that everything will be okay. They may test how they feel about dangers or uncertainties. They might scan, monitor and check sensations in the body or externally the threats in the world. People generally get really in their heads and worry and ruminate and judge all day long as it gets more intense. OCD tends to latch on to themes that relate to what people care about and value in life, and they worry about what could go wrong in these important areas. Common examples that the media and culture often latch onto is contamination OCD, checking OCD, and perfectionism or just so, getting things to feel right. People wrongly use the phrase, "I'm so OCD," to refer to liking things to be clean, orderly. This is not OCD. Because when people feel like this, they like this feeling. This is egosyntonic and they feel calmer and more safe with this. Whereas OCD is ego-dystonic, distressing, causes a lot of impairment to their life, and it is a much more intense experience than these media portrayals. There are also common subtypes that are less well known. A subtype is when your OCD latches onto a particular theme. Some of these subtypes get grouped under the term intrusive thoughts, or they sometimes get called pure O. That is because they're purely obsessional, but really it means we're doing all the compulsions in our head. Common topics under these categories are fear of harm, so that can be fear that we're going to harm others or that we might not prevent harm. People get taboo sexual intrusive thoughts, so they worry about being attracted to people that they're not attracted to, so it can attack people's sexual orientation. It can even have forms like POCD or pedophile OCD when people worry that they would harm or molest younger people. People get worried about incest and they get gender dysphoria themes when they know in themselves they are a certain gender, but they start to worry about what if I wasn't. So very different to genuine gender dysphoria. People get moral scrupulosity OCD when they worry about their religion. They worry about being a bad person. They have the fear of being cancelled in today's modern culture. And they might get hyper-awareness about body sensations. So people get caught up with blinking, breathing, heart rate, tingling sensations, thoughts. They get hyper aware on these internal experiences and very preoccupied and distracted. You also have existential OCD, when people get caught up on philosophical questions like, am I real? Are there other people out there? What happens when we die? And other questions that really have not been answered by science and popular wisdom. OCD can also latch onto your health and worry about diseases and illnesses. People don't always know these subtypes, and they worry about coming forward. They think they might be misdiagnosed, or people might think they really want to do these things they're frightened of, and it causes a lot of shame and secrecy. In some studies, it takes 14 to 17 years for someone to be diagnosed with OCD. And these subtypes can even cause people to become suicidal because they carry so much shame and distress and they think they really are a bad person. People can have different levels of insight into their OCD. Some people have good insight where they really recognize the OCD as ego dystonic, it's not what they want to do and who they are, and the risks are unrealistic, but it feels very distressing still. But you have people with very low insight or absent insight, and this is where people get so caught up in the OCD, they start to act as if it's true, believe it's true, and this means they avoid everything in life more and more. OCD can get very complex. Everyone is an individual, and it shows up with the obsessions, compulsions, triggers, behaviors, but the way it comes together is very idiosyncratic. So obsessions can come as words. Sometimes this is what if this thing will happen, or what if I'm this type of person, but also our brain can start to command or judge us or come as single intrusive words. Some people have a lot more images, distressing images of the things they're frightened of or disgusted by. It can come very much as an emotion or physical sensation in the body, and it can come as an impulse where we feel like we're about to move and we're not actually, a lot like when people are stood at the top of a tall building and they feel like they're going to jump off and then they step back. It can be very complex because it can be comorbid with depression and other difficulties like panic, dissociation. It can have different emotions with it, not just anxiety. You can have shame, disgust, trauma can be part of this experience. And as I said before, you have different levels of insight. You add all this together, it gets very complex. So what about trauma and OCD? OCD and trauma can have a relationship. If people have a trauma history and OCD, they can have a static relationship where they don't interact very much and the person happens to have both disorders, or they can have a dynamic relationship where the trauma and the OCD very much interact. For example, the OCD might be all about avoiding the trauma happening again to themselves or someone else. Up to 78% of people identified a stressful life event prior to OCD onset, and 54% of people report at least one traumatic life event with OCD. So you can see there's a lot of overlap. If someone has both OCD and trauma, we need to work on both of these difficulties in parallel. You often need to get a really good stable base of skills to deal with the distressing symptoms, behaviors that support the person. And once we have this stability in place, then we can start to tackle the OCD and the trauma in parallel. You might use gold standard treatments like prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy together with ERP. For me, I use acceptance and commitment therapy and compassion focused therapy because they are the therapies that have helped me the most in my history. So how do we recover from OCD? Gold standard treatment for OCD is cognitive behavior therapy and a form of that called exposure and response prevention. It's the gold standard treatment, which means it has the best evidence base, the greatest number of studies and the most evidence pointing to it being helpful. ERP involves learning the psychoeducation of OCD, understanding the cycle, understanding the way obsessions and compulsions show up. And then we start to engage in exposure and response prevention, where we list triggers and things that will activate the OCD that we then start to face and we let go of the compulsions, and over time clients will habituate to these triggers and the OCD symptoms will reduce. Or people learn a new association with the triggers. They learn they can cope with these difficulties. So these are the two models of ERP, which is the habituation model and the inhibitory learning model. I use another model called acceptance and commitment therapy, which many people in the ERP and OCD world integrate into ERP now. And it has a growing evidence base, particularly in America, where it's recognized as a treatment with great potential for OCD. The reason I use ACT is, number one, it was very helpful in my own journey with OCD, but we can use the values and goals and ideas from ACT to increase motivation. Often with OCD, we're really struggling with our mental compulsions and getting caught in rumination, and acceptance and commitment therapy has a lot of tools to work with that rumination. And the other side of it is it's very hard to sit with intense feelings during ERP, and ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, provides tools to sit with these difficult emotions, urges, and resist the compulsions. So for many people, it's like a scaffolding tool to help them engage in ERP. I also find self-compassion to be very useful to add into this process. This is because people with OCD have immense shame. They often carry shame and guilt about what their mind is saying, the content, also the behaviors, the compulsions they're doing, and that they're a person with vulnerability. So they can carry shame about this, worrying about how they're perceived by others, thinking that others are judging them and really are judging them very harshly. So self-compassion becomes a tool to counteract this shame and to work with the guilt of OCD. So this approach, it starts with learning about OCD. So we learn the psychoeducation, we learn the rationale for treatment, then we move into learning acceptance and commitment skills, compassion skills. Once those skills are strong and in place, then we move into the ERP. And we use the ACT skills within the ERP to help us to stop the compulsions, to let them go. Other things we'll do is work on compassion to the shame, our history. We might do trauma work if that's needed. We will think about rebuilding a meaningful life after the impact of OCD and grieving the losses, because OCD may have put our life on hold. I like to help clients try to make purpose of this pain through connection and reaching out and being of service to others who may be struggling, connecting in recovery communities, and helping other people who have difficulties with mental health. If we put this all together, we can get to this place of recovery. So what does recovery even mean? With OCD, it's very important to not see recovery as the absence of intrusive thoughts. So the research on this is very clear. Everyone, including people without OCD, have intrusive thoughts. And some people have lots of them, and some people only have transient intrusive thoughts at times. But everyone has them. So recovery is about the ability to experience these intrusive thoughts and difficult feelings and not respond with compulsions in behavior or in our thoughts. So we allow these experiences to rise and fall without struggle, we have acceptance, and we stay focused on our values and life goals. The side effect is that symptoms will reduce. They'll become more transient, bothersome. They may even go dormant. But the key is we have to be able to accept and handle the obsessions and not do the compulsions. OCD can come back at times of stress, and people sometimes do suffer setbacks and relapses. So we've got to be ready with our skills to cope with that. If we get really skilled at recovery, we get the silver lining of OCD, which is that we can actually handle difficult thoughts and feelings more skillfully. We're not so overwhelmed by stress. We can focus on what we think is most meaningful in life, and life gets easier because of recovery. What are the barriers to recovery? Many people struggle with these approaches. One is that we might have low insight, so we really believe the OCD, and that might mean someone finds it hard to even come into therapy. So we have to learn about the OCD cycle and the rationale for treatment so that we can get to the place where we will challenge our OCD. People can have such overwhelming feelings that they struggle with this and they don't want to go near the panic, dissociation, shame, disgust. People can have life stresses, their environment, their social situation, they're in poverty, they're in a traumatic environment, can really set people back. We can have unrealistic expectations of therapy. We think we want the whole symptoms removed, and unfortunately, as I said before, that's not the way we recover. We can be afraid to engage in ERP. We have such complex mental compulsions that our mind is really struggling with just getting tangled up with rumination. I work with people who are often doing ERP, but they're still doing a lot of mental and physical compulsions, and that can undermine the treatment. So once we've weeded out the garden of the compulsions, then we need to plant flowers. We need to put other positive behaviors in there. People can struggle because of the comorbidity with other disorders, so depression, panic, trauma, other difficulties. People don't always want to tackle the core fear, so we work at the surface level of OCD symptoms and we don't look at the core fear, which might be feeling that I'm going to be rejected by everyone, or afraid that my life will be unhappy and miserable, or fears of dying and other things that may sit below the OCD. And then OCD may pop back up as a different theme that reflects that core fear. We may have difficulties with shame, and we're very hard and self-critical. We may have intense urges to do compulsions, and we're not very good at surfing those urges yet. And we may experience resistance. Our mind may fight back because it doesn't want us to go out and take risks. It wants us to stay in avoidance mode. So it resists. It comes up with new fears. It switches form. It gets obsessed about the treatment and how to do it perfectly, or is it working? So our mind can resist this process, and that makes it hard to work on recovery. How should we respond to these barriers then? Number one is understanding the rationale for treatment and having psychoeducation about OCD and recovery. If we know why we're doing something, if we have some commitment and belief to the process, it's going to be easier. Then I like to draw from ACT, so we bring in the motivational tools of values and goals, getting very clear about what I want my life to be rather than what I want to avoid with OCD. And we think about workability, which is how do these behaviors work for me over the long run? Once we get that motivation high, then we work on the acceptance skills, the mindfulness skills, attentional skills, so that I can observe the intrusive thoughts, not react, be with the difficult feelings, and control my attention onto the things I value. It can help to do a very gradual progression if someone has very destabilizing and distressing OCD. We have to be ready for the backlash, this resistance that our mind gives, and it can feel like our mind's attacking us, but really it's trying to protect us. It's really frightened of these things that sit below OCD, and it's trying to push us into avoidance. So we have to be ready for that resistance. I think it's key to be doing targeted, deliberate practice every day on these skills and ERP, and then how we respond to OCD in the moment is critical. For me, in my OCD journey, it was how I brought those skills into day-to-day life, worked with intense symptoms, got through the crisis moments with skills that produced the long-lasting recovery. Social support is key, like all mental health difficulties, and if you can meet other people with OCD and your subtype, that will be very supportive for you. You may get this resistance. You may have to rehearse how you're going to use your skills, set your intention, and reflect on how you're doing. You might journal this to build up this understanding of what's going on and how your recovery is going. But at the end of the day, you have to bring a gentle relentlessness to the recovery process. You have to keep going even when it gets tough and go on and on like an endurance event. In the end, you'll get to that recovery you're looking for. I'm Jonny Say. I'm an integrative therapist, BACP accredited, and I specialize on OCD, trauma, anxiety disorders. If you want to find my work, you can go to jonnysaytherapy.com. We also have a website for our centre, the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy.co.uk. I'm on social media. You can find Jonny Say Therapy on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I put a lot of resources on YouTube for mental health recovery. We also have a YouTube for the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy. So look us up and come and enjoy the resources. I've had a great day filming with Mindfriend, been really supported, and a lovely team to work with, and delicious sandwiches.